Dan McGowan, the Boston Globe. We've got some politics to talk about.
Oh, I feel like we do this every couple of months, and it's the best.
It really is. So, and now it's fun because it's actually political season, and things are starting to get interesting.
And people actually might be paying a little bit of attention.
Yeah, which is such a huge difference. And maybe we should start right there, where we have these discussions in the political class, if you will, which is such a dangerous term, and that it's such an awful term. But amongst the people who pay attention for a job or for extreme interest, these are always discussions that are happening. Do you really think that right now is the moment where the average person is starting to at least get some sense it's an election year and figure out who these people are?
Yeah, I mean, I still think we might be a little ways off before like people really know. I mean, you're starting to see, some of the political things that happen. So like mailers hitting mailboxes. Brett Smiley, we're going to talk about the mayor's race, has been pretty active of doing that. Less so in the governor's race, right? But although I would expect relatively quickly to at least see Helena Foulkes kind of on the air, so that'll be a real sign. Usually it's the campaign commercials that are the first real sign of, boy, this is starting to get real. But I totally agree with you. I mean, I feel like it's, you've been saying for months, maybe even a year now, how much kind of this governor's race in particular is boring. Nobody knows what's kind of happening. I think that's been totally right. And yeah, it's just been one of those things that we've been talking about, certainly in the journalistic community. God, we've been talking about the 26 governor's race since the day the 22 governor's race ended. And now it's finally like, wow, people might be paying a little bit of attention.
Right. And even before that, because you think about before it was expected that Raimondo was going to leave for D.C., 2022, 2026, was viewed in a different lane, so to speak, in terms of who the breakout candidate would be in a lot of people's minds anyway.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. And I think, what's so funny is one of my favorite things in sports journalism is the day after the national championship in football or the NCAA basketball championship, the day after is always the way too early rankings for next season.
Right.
I love reading those because it's completely crazy that they do it, but it's so much fun. And we are sort of in a perpetual state of that, right? Mm-hmm. It's always who might be next, who might be maneuvering. And sometimes it's not that it's made up, but it's very inside baseball. I mean, I wrote something this week about the Cranston mayor's race in 2028. Right. So, it is what it is, but it's nice when it actually starts to become a little bit more meaningful.
Yeah, and I think people are picking up on issue by issue interest in a way that maybe I haven't personally seen in previous election cycles, where it's not directly related to the election. For example, AI and data centers. I did an event in Newport with Newport Film a couple of weeks ago at the Jane Pickens Theater. It was sold out. They showed a documentary about AI, and then I moderated a panel with a bunch of basically computer science and data experts from the state. And what was most impactful, though, was the amount of people that stayed and asked questions and stayed well after the Q&A ended to ask additional questions. And you're like, okay, people are paying attention, and this is absolutely politics. It's just maybe not the Washington Bridge or opioids. So,
that's right. And it's the kind of thing that, real people are thinking about and care about because they're worried about their jobs or they're worried about how to use it the right way. And when it comes to AI, things like that. Funny enough, unfortunately, in a governor's race, I can't imagine that Helena Foulkes or Dan McKee are going to lead with AI.
Right.
Even though, to his credit, the governor has that task force, and I think Helena Foulkes will probably. I think you can't. I think the debate questions will include something about AI, but it'll be more kind of an obligatory we have to ask than having like really concentrated plans.
Right. Well, let's get into some specifics here, because there's really two major political stories right now they're tied to the two races that I think are front and center: the Providence mayoral race and the Democrat primary, and then now with Ken Block, a general election that is interesting as well. We also have this back burner kind of tied to the governor's race, back burner story of Speaker Shekarchi potentially becoming a Supreme Court justice. So there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes, but right in front of the public right now, let's talk about the Providence mayoral race, centered in large part publicly on the issue of rent stabilization. You're someone who wrote quite favorably about Mayor Smiley when he came in 2022 in your columns. You've also been, and I think it would be universally agreed, you kind of introduced the David Morales political world to the greater audience through a column that you wrote about him at the wrestling column.
Yeah.
And So you've been covering both of these people as humans, as political creatures. So when you look at this race, even though rent stabilization is the central issue in a lot of people's minds right now, is that the central issue to this race? And how do you see this playing out with the dividing line that's really been cast here on the rent stabilization issue?
Well, stepping back, I love the way you set that up when it comes to, an issue or issues that are maybe going to define political races. I tried to rack my brain about this, at least in the time that I've covered Providence politics. Go back to 2010, right? So I've covered a couple of mayor's races, pretty competitive ones. I can't think of a time where any sort of policy truly defined the race, right? You just quickly, you go back to 2010, open mayoral seat when David Cicilline was running for Congress. There wasn't a lot of talk. Even, we ended up having a financial crisis, but we don't find out about that financial crisis until Angel Tavares takes office, right?
Right.
So there wasn't like a big conversation about how, here's my plan for the pension system, or here's my plan to shore up the city's finances. It was, kind of a lot of cookie cutter and a lot of retail politics. You go to 14, now it's a Buddy Cianci race, so everything is personality, it's corruption versus, new versus old. There wasn't a ton of great grand ideas, and certainly no execution of those ideas after. Mayor Lorza wins re-election in 18, largely against opponents that weren't very serious, and so he kind of wins just fine. 22, Brett Smiley, Gonzalo Cuervo, and Nervo LaFortune, that race was really kind of a well-executed victory by Mayor Smiley in the way that he spent years and years building up kind of chips everywhere he could, knew what kind of voter, he wanted to support him, knew he could, do very well on the east side, that kind of thing. And so it wasn't like, you could say Mayor Smiley ran as, the back to basics candidate. That's fine, but it wasn't as though he had a grand plan to do anything.
Right.
Finally, you kick forward to right now. Yeah, this is the first time in my career, and maybe really going back many, many years before that, where I think rent stabilization or rent control is going to be, the conversation that's kind of the first question at every debate and forum. I think there's just very clearly, two distinct sides of this when it comes to Mayor Smiley being against it. He's, of course, vetoed the ordinance that was passed by the city council. David Morales is running basically his entire campaign on this idea that this is what we need. He believes this is the issue. And so I think it's healthy because it's a good conversation to have. And yeah, it's unlike anything we've covered before. It means that you, as reporters and as I think as voters, people have to, dig in a little more and understand it and understand, both the criticism of it, which Mayor Smiley's criticism of it isn't unfair. It's just, it's clearly point of view. He feels very strongly that it's a bad idea. Rep Morales doesn't quite concede anything could possibly be wrong with it. Understandable, because he feels that way, but it's a worthy conversation to be having because, yeah, the backdrop is that people are being priced out of the city constantly.
Are you ready to take the next step in your career? At URI Online, we offer business and leadership-focused programs designed to fit your life. Whether your goal is to advance your career in fields like public administration, supply chain management, or training and development, our online programs provide the flexibility you need with a high-quality education you deserve. Learn from experienced faculty and collaborate with a network of professionals, all from the comfort of your home or wherever life takes you. Visit uri.edu/online to explore programs and start building your future today. URI Online. Learn anywhere with us.
You and your employees work hard for your customers. At HealthSource RI for Employers, we work hard for all of you. We offer access to 18 quality health insurance plans plus dental, flexible costs to meet your budget and get your staff what they need, and customized local support to guide you through it all. More than 1,200 Rhode Island employers choose health insurance through us. HealthSource RI. We work for you. HealthSourceRI.com/employers.
Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Newport Film. Visit newportfilm.com. As Rhode Island's first ever member-owned credit union, Navigant Credit Union has been a staple in the local business community for more than 108 years. Today, Navigant is a $3.4 billion institution serving more than 136,000 members across 25 physical branch locations. But since its founding in 1915, the mission has never changed. Navigant Credit Union's team of financial professionals have remained committed to improving the financial well-being of the families, businesses, and communities they serve across Rhode Island. Learn more at navigantcu.org. Bartholomew Town is brought to you in part by Waterfire Providence. Visit waterfire.org. Half Street Group brings a new generation's perspective to leadership communications, strategic public relations, and digital marketing. Half Street helps organizations and leaders take control of their own stories and manage their reputations. They get results for their clients by focusing on audience, message, and culture, and by leveraging their decade-long relationship with media and opinion leaders in the Ocean State and throughout New England. Join me and Half Street Group founder and president Mike Rea for a conversation every month about news of the day, the hottest media analysis, and a look behind the scenes at how impactful leaders drive conversations. Learn more at halfstreetgroup.com. Follow me on Instagram at Bill Bartholomew. Right, and that is real. There's no doubt. And there's no doubt that the legislation that was put forth, or the package that was put forth, really, in the versions, the revisions, the carve-outs, and all that, it's real. It's not a guaranteed death on arrival piece of legislation, except for in this environment, which it is. And it was kind of always clear that as constituted, there was no way the mayor was going to sign it, and it was very difficult to imagine a veto-proof, a majority scenario happening. So my question is, looking at this, it almost seems like too perfect of a political divide for an election season, and I start to wonder, maybe that was the point all along.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a fair question. And, there was a part of the political animal in me thought maybe the smartest thing for Mayor Smiley to do would have been to let it become law without his signature, and then his budget doesn't fund it. His, he could. There's a whole bunch of pieces, provisions in that policy that I think were probably not as dramatic or drastic as opponents would have said, and so there could have been an interesting move there to kind of let it become law and really not entirely enforce it, and then you sort of first of all, you'd have a re-election where it'll be too soon to argue whether it's being enforced. So you've mitigated that to some degree, and then you figure it out going forward. That would have been an interesting political maneuver, purely political. To Mayor Smiley's credit, he feels pretty principled in this stance. He's actually against this idea, and that's why he vetoed it. I do think it starts to become. You said too perfect. I think that's a good way to put it. The city council leadership, in many of the supporters, this is certainly true, knew that it was likely to be vetoed and knew that they likely didn't have the votes to override. They view this as, a good thing politically because you can, it gives a clear stance in the mayor's race. City council leadership does not like Mayor Smiley. They would love to see David Morales be elected. But even beyond that, you're trying to win a couple of seats on the city council. Now you've got an issue. Now you've got people out there who feel this is a really important issue, who maybe are going to knock a few more doors. Maybe they're going to donate a little more. So it sets up as a political victory, even when you don't actually get the ordinance into place. And there's a real scenario where, a couple of different things could happen. One, it's possible that David Morales could become the mayor, number one. Number two, if David Morales doesn't become the mayor, if the city council elects one or two more people, the leadership does, you now have a veto-proof majority.
Right. And maybe there's some lane as well. He hasn't admitted it as much, at least that I've heard, but there's some lane that this appeals to the Smiley. There's a way I think that this could appeal to the Smiley administration and supporters, but it's going to require so much work that it can't be done in a couple of weeks in the spring. This is one of those pieces of legislation that is going to be a real dance to figure out, and you might have to start carving out by address.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's where, it's easy to pick apart the why this was rushed, this kind of thing. On one hand, that is true. On the other, city council has been tipping their hand at this for a very long time. Rachel Miller, the council president, has wanted to do this ever since she took office. Mayor Smiley showed very little, if any, openness to actually having a negotiation about it. And so, he kind of set his political brand as, I'm against this. I don't think it works. He has credible thoughts behind that, right? He points to a St. Paul, Minnesota, or other places where he doesn't think it has worked. And so, this wasn't like other issues where everybody sees some level of political benefit to some type of compromise. It's not like pension reform. It's not like even, some of the public safety stuff that happened in the, late 2010s or
pedestrian bridge and the bike lane and all that business.
Anything like that, right? There's this one, Mayor Smiley actually, I think, reads it as a political advantage to him to oppose it. And of course, the city council reads it as a political advantage to support it.
Yeah, no doubt. Of course, there is an alternative, and people can certainly find maybe the compromise candidate, our favorite, Alan Waters, is in the mix. So
Alan Waters is running yet again, and he'll get some small percentage of the vote.
Yep, and that may be some people's solution right there. All right, so turning to the governor's race, look, it's a push poll that came out this week, and there's no doubt that I say there's two things that we learned from that poll. Number one, Ken Block's a legitimate candidate. Two, people want change. Beyond that, okay, whatever. But what do you take away right now from the governor's race, just in terms of the energy around it with the Block entrance? And we're seeing the governor today is in Washington at a campaign-related event, for example. We're seeing, I'm getting a little bit more text messaging, I'm sure you are,
yes,
times 10, from people asking about setting things up and when's this, that, or the other. The debates are coming together. So it feels like the energy's there. What do you sense is the most important thing people should know right now about this race?
Well, I guess who's running, right? So it helps with that, right? You've got on the Democratic primary side, Dan McKee and Helena Folks. Right. That seems pretty settled. I don't think you're going to get any other, at least not, people who can do anything other than get a couple of percentage points in the vote. The Republican side, you have Bob Raimondo, Elaine Polino, Aaron Gukian. Aaron Gukian appears, by all accounts, to be the favorite there. But I think what Ken Block's entrance into the race does is one, in his poll, for as much as people may nitpick over certain parts of the poll, very clearly Ken Block, I think, starts the race in second place, right? He's ahead of the Republican, whoever the Republican nominee is going to be. I think that means, for the first time in his political career, Ken Block means something. He's relevant. Yeah. He just hasn't been that person before. 2010 was a spoiler candidate trying to get his party on the ballot. 2014 kind of ran a little bit of a more angry campaign in the Republican primary against Alan Fung, kind of lost his way, I would argue. Where it was more about stopping Alan Fung than it was about actually presenting a vision for the state.
It was similar to Joe Trillo's campaign, which was, number one, we were against Alan Fung. Number two, okay, let's find some sort of coalition.
Yeah, maybe we'll win.
Right.
And now I think it's more real. I'm not sure how much that's Ken Block or how much that's a weak Republican Party, a weak or a very, a governor with a very high disapproval rating, things like that. But it doesn't really matter. Ken Block is absolutely a factor in this race. Can he win? I don't know. I think, you start to take a look at whoever comes out of the Democratic primary. Look, if Dan McKee is victorious in the Democratic primary, one, it's going to be a remarkable political comeback for him, right? He is in a very bad space right now. And so you've got to assume you can't win with wherever he is in the polls, 20s or low 30s. He would not win if that is the case.
Not a chance. No, there's no scenario where he has anywhere near enough of a coalition or numbers. It's just a numbers game. It's not even close.
That being said, if he does win the primary, you have to assume something has changed. Voters have changed their minds. They didn't like Helena Folks. Something happened between where we sit today and September 8th, right? And so that's where, he would come out of a Democratic primary with a lot of momentum if he were to win. If Helena Folks wins the primary, that's where I kind of write off Ken Block. I think if Helena Folks wins the primary, voters are going to signal they want change. We trust her as the change candidate. I think it becomes incredibly difficult to be essentially a newcomer on the Democratic side. But this is where I'm hesitant to say, Ken Block is I think his pollster said he has a runway, and that's of course what a pollster is going to do. But I think he's in a good place. I could still see a scenario where he's sort of a distant second in the end, when voters actually have their say. Yeah. But again, he is more meaningful. He's more interesting. He makes the general election a lot more interesting to guys like us.
Yep.
And he's going to force certainly whoever comes out of that Democratic primary to spend a lot of money and to take it very seriously.
Yeah, and also there's a value for the voter benefits so much from a Ken Block because it's not a garbage candidate. It's not somebody who gets in there and has either one issue or a grievance or something like that. A debate with Ken Block or a Ken Block response to something that one of the Democrat candidates put out, or even if it's Aaron Gakian on the Republican side, there's a value to that debate. And for the most part, I think the Ken Block brand probably should be focusing on authenticity. Mm-hmm. I worry that maybe leading with some of the characterization of we're the front runner.
Right.
Is an initial, that grabs a headline, and there are some people who will bite and run with that fully. Mm-hmm. I wonder if it's better to just say, hey, authentically, people are into change right now. People like what we're saying here and what we're doing here. Let's grow this thing. Let's find the right network of people on the left, people on the right that are not ideologues. That's it from an authenticity standpoint.
Yeah, I didn't love the headline or the subject line of his, poll results saying we're in the lead. That wasn't true, right? It was after testing and after I say Bill Bartholomew is the most wonderful human on earth, Dan McGowan is horrible. How do you feel? And then Bill Bartholomew kills me. You probably beat me anyway, but
I don't know about that.
But, I do think, I think you've hit it on the head. The difference now, too, is that because of the Washington Bridge, I think Ken Block can capitalize on the thing that, Rhode Islanders are always deeply cynical, but now you have something very tangible that you can talk about, and it allows you to, and this is the thing that Helena Folks is, of course, going to do in a Democratic primary, too, but what it allows you to do is, all the nitpicky stuff that Ken Block is always all over, now everything can go back to, just like the Washington Bridge, the DOA, Department of Administration kind of snafus, things like the tax forms, things like that. Oh, just like the Washington Bridge. You can just keep reinforcing it, and everybody understands. And I always use this anecdote. I was at the Columbus Day Festival last year on Federal Hill, and I was in line getting sausage and peppers, and the people in front of me were all laughing and joking about how much they hate the Washington Bridge. I mean, that thing has broken through as 38 Studios on steroids, right? It's more like in many ways the financial crisis in 1990, right? It's like the banks closing in terms of the stickiness to it.
Oh my God, yeah, absolutely.
And so if you're Ken Block, you're in a perfect spot. I'm a fixer. And so you just keep reinforcing. I'm a fixer. Nobody understands what a software technologist does. I couldn't tell you the first thing about him rooting out waste and fraud in Texas. But you know what? He's reinforced that so many times. And then I look at the other people around him that haven't done that kind of work. It actually sells in this moment more so than it did before. He's running in 2010, trying to replace a Republican governor. So he's wishy-washy about going really hard after the Republican governor. 2014, again, it got kind of lost with Alan Fung. It was just sort of a let's fight Alan Fung kind of thing. Now you've got a moment where people are cynical. They have a right to be cynical and a reason to be cynical, and there's a symbol for it all. That's why there's an opening for him.
Yeah, I think at some point, debates or otherwise, he's going to have to start to answer questions about social issues and things like that. Mm-hmm. I heard him on with Tara Granahan on WPRO, and he was asked about remarks he made about guns, and she asked a question that was not quite straightforward, where he was able to get out of the question. She asked, like, "Oh, are you opposed to confiscation of, what do they call them, AR-16s?"
Yes, right.
So so he had kind of a landing spot where he could say, I'm not talking about that, but a direct question about that. Hey, are you in favor of this legislation? I think he would. I don't think it's controversial to say I am not in favor of that. Only a handful of people would probably agree with the notion that, we should probably go and take away that grandfather clause. That's the exact thing we should do right now. But on other things, people are going to look at Ken Block, and it was interesting that some of the responses I got from some people that I know to be smart, thoughtful people, but definitely left on everything that they post or talk about. And their concerns were like, well, this guy's, he's a Republican. And because he can't win, Republicans can't win in Rhode Island, so he's just running as an independent. I think in order to distance himself from that, he's going to have to go out and talk about some of the things he's posted anti-gun commentary on Facebook. I've read it. I think I've screenshotted it, and he's going to have to do that, because otherwise people are going to start to say, I was trying to think of it the other day. What was the Patricia Morgan when she ran for the coalition that was like Arlene Violet and Ken Block around Patricia Morgan?
Right.
That's going to come back to bite him. He should get ahead of that if he wants to win.
Yeah, I think he does have he has a spot right now because he's the new kid on the block in the context of this race, right? So we're kind of giving him, I hate to say giving him a pass because I don't think it's exactly true, but he's kind of getting the new shiny treatment. Got a poll he put out. Yep. He's quick. He's very engaging. He's a very likable guy. I think all of us in the media have talked to him either on or off the record for many, many years. So we all feel pretty comfortable with him. And so right now he kind of gets away a little bit with that sort of, I'm not going to be answering those questions, and that's my brand. Like, I don't care about those issues. I sat down with him this week and was asking a little bit about sort of what kind of Republican candidate could you see yourself supporting? John Laughlin, for example. Yep. And he was sort of wishy-washy about whether he, where he stood on that, though he was complimentary of John. Have you ever voted for Donald Trump? Crystal clear. Like, have you ever done that? I know you took on Donald Trump in trying to, disprove his voter fraud claims, but have you ever voted for him? Why did you vote for him? Those kind of things. And he very much says, I'm not going to be talking about that. I learned my lesson in 2010. There was a whole thing about him he voted for Barack Obama, I believe. And so he had to deal with that from the conservative side. Oh, outrageous. You voted for Barack Obama. Yeah. I think he thinks that he's maybe being a little more clever than he is. You're right. He is going to have to answer that question. And a good moderator like yourself in a debate or Channel 12, those guys, they're not going to let you off the hook with, I don't want to talk about that. They'll just pause and make you answer the question until you're awkward, and it'll be a standoff, right? Yeah. He's going to have to answer those kind of questions. And so, I don't think you get away from guns. I don't think you get away from those kind of things. I actually do think, though, he's not wrong. In this whole gun debate that's played out over the last 10 days or so, I understand the passion behind it, but I wish that the person who came closest to being the most honest about it was actually Governor McKee, who was kind of like, I couldn't see myself supporting a legislation that would, where we'd take away guns, but it doesn't matter because it's not going to pass. It's not going to
be. That was with Matt Allen. I heard that interview live. I was like, thank you. Thank you for actually being clearly honest in that regard.
And that's what, when I get people that reach out to me and say, how come you're not covering this? And in this case, in guns is tough because on both sides, you get people that are passionately pro Second Amendment who think that, not covering something means you're covering it up. Yeah. And then you get passionate, take everybody's guns away no matter what, who are saying you're ignoring this really important topic. And my response always very clearly is just what Governor McKee said. It's not going to pass. You know why last year's gun bills got a lot of attention? Because it was going to pass. Some version of taking, of a stance on assault weapons was clearly going to pass. Dominic Ruggiero, God rest his soul, made it clear that was going to happen. This one, it's not getting a ton of mainstream coverage. It's gotten some attention, but I kind of agree that like these guys don't necessarily have to answer the question other than, broad stance. Could you support a piece of legislation that bans possession of assault style weapons or something like that? Yeah. I think that's reasonable. But these hypothetical bills, there are hundreds and hundreds of bills every year introduced. Some of them are the wackiest things you've ever read. Again, on both sides of any issue.
Are we going to start asking candidates, what's your take on psychedelic mushrooms now that Trump's whatever? Come on. Exactly. At some point, we have to be honest about what's most important to the Unitarian. Right. But I think, like you said, broadly speaking, that's going to be a big pivot point. Mm-hmm. To his favor or perhaps not. I don't know. I actually don't really know the entirety of his if you wanted to put the litmus test out there and someone were to put a rubric, what I think people did learn the lesson of, though, in 2024 is, if you showed up and you said, I can't stand Kamala Harris, but I'm totally opposed to Trump. I'm worried about fascism. So I'm going to write something in like, I'm going to vote for prison abolition for president.
Right.
And people voted for prison abolition for president pathetically. And that resulted in Donald Trump in part, maybe not literally, but in part, at least. I think there's going to be more scrutiny by the voter this year about who they cast their vote for, and the lesser of two evils, if that is the case, people may go back to that notion. And
I don't think it's unreasonable whatsoever to say, who did you vote for in the 2024 presidential election?
Yeah.
I think that is entirely fair. And people who don't like that question are largely going to be people who don't want to admit that they voted for Donald Trump. I think there are probably some people who would say they don't want to admit that they voted for Kamala Harris. But yeah, that's a relevant and reasonable question. I don't think you can wiggle out of that doesn't matter. It may not be the most important topic of all, and you could maybe make that argument, but at the end of the day, my follow-up is, so who did you vote for?
Yeah. To be determined as this governor's race moves along. Just quickly here, your take on the unless you have anything else you want to add on the governor's race.
No, I mean, again, I think I'm hopeful to just piggyback on sort of your thoughts. I'm hopeful it does start to become a slightly more substantive race. I fear it won't be, at least on the primary side. I fear it will be, entirely opioids versus competence. And I think both sides believe that that's the winning strategy. And so that's what they're going to do, which is doesn't do any service to voters.
Yeah. And it's just one of those questions where you start to ask, once again, the political process, the political machine, if that's the best strategy for them to deploy as compared with what the people need right now and what they actually want to discuss.
Right.
You just see that disconnect playing out. And it's almost like a nuclear disarmament pact.
Yeah.
We almost should have that. Can we just have Helena Folks and Dan McKee in the middle of the State House? We'll get some neutral party. I'll put a turtle in the middle of the thing or something. I'll pull it out of Worden's Pond in South Kingstown. Just everybody. No more opioids, no more competence. McKee's a smart guy. He's an accomplished guy. He's a leader. He's a proven leader. Helena Folks is a smart woman. She's an accomplished woman. She's a proven leader. Can we just have a governor's race?
Right. Let's just debate the issues or you know what? Here's something fun. Come up with different critiques of one another.
Right.
There are other things to critique about.
It was more than just opioids, folks.
Right.
The Xanax was flowing as well.
Exactly. Right. Unfortunately, that is where it would go.
Shikarchi, I mean, it's so stupid to hear this notion that there's not horse trading or something. Come on, this whole thing is horse trading, right? I mean, it's how it works, and it's just how it is. And if you look at the history of really courtship appointments writ large, but definitely Supreme Court on a statewide basis, this is a political gig. It is not simply, all right, I'm going to stand and look out, out of the State House and like ponder of all the legal minds I've ever encountered or whatever, and who might be the best. Who should I call upon? I'll send them I'll have a scroll delivered to them by hand requesting their presence. This is horse trading. Come on.
Yeah, there's no SAT test for the best possible judge, right? Like they've all passed the bar, and that's pretty much where they can be. So yeah, of course there's trading or implied trading, or maybe if I do this, you'll do this. I don't think I do actually, truly believe that Joe Shikarchi, who, of course, the context of this is will he apply to the Supreme Court seat?
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think that there's ever a scenario where he sits across having lunch with Dan McKee and says, the Democratic Party is going to endorse you if you make me a judge. Yeah. That's not how it works. That being said, if you're Dan McKee, you have to have in the back of your head, there are a couple of things that I want if I'm going to give away a coveted judgeship. Sure, you're a good guy, Speaker Shikarchi. You're qualified based on what the qualifications suggest. But I'm certainly not going to, if you're going to turn around and allow the Democratic Party to endorse my opponent as I'm the incumbent governor, or if you're going to really screw up my budget in a gubernatorial election year, I don't think that I'd be willing to support, if I'm Governor McKay, I don't think I'd be willing to support you. Right. So there has to be some trading or working out there. And Speaker Shikarchi similarly is not going to ever say, I'll do this for this. But absolutely. I mean, I've made this joke before. Peter Nerona would not get a judgeship no matter how much we all think he might be qualified, because McKee doesn't like him.
Right. Bingo. And it's a joke, but it's actually true. And it's a perfect example. Like, let's say Nerona didn't want to retire or whatever he's going to do next. I don't know if retire is the right word, get out of public office. But he did, let's say he wanted to become a judge. Right. He's not going to become a judge. It's just that simple. That's a personal issue. That's a political issue. It's not a competency issue, and he would probably be an awesome Supreme Court judge. I think. I don't know. Maybe he wouldn't like it, so he wouldn't. But
well, right. But just flat out, it wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And that is how it works, right? Every judgeship is political to some degree. Again, It's not a test. And so it's always somebody who can you get an approval? Can it get through the Senate? Those kind of things. Everyone's got a motive. It doesn't matter how honorable or dishonorable you are. There's always a reason it happens, and it goes beyond just whether or not they'd be a great choice. Sometimes it's, you think back to Gina Raimondo when she did this. She wanted to put a person of color on the bench. She put Melissa Long there.
That's right.
Aaron Lynch Prada was very public, was the senator at the time, was very helpful to Gina Raimondo in Warwick as she was running for re-election.
That's right.
Walked around, knocked doors with Gina Raimondo. Well, guess what? Yes, they ended up, making her a judge. That is sort of how this works. By the way, both of those two, Judge Long and Judge Lynch Prada, are having a great experience on the bench and seem, from all accounts, to be, terrific judges. Joe Shikarchi may very well be a terrific judge, but don't pretend that there aren't politics in play. There are plenty of people, even in the General Assembly, who might be qualified, who wouldn't even get a shot at this.
Right.
In part because the Speaker is the one that's holding a lot of the cards.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you're right. Judge Long is an amazing woman, amazing justice, and but you're right. There are always going to be people who are going to say, well, that's DEI. There's someone's going to come and say,
right.
oh my God,
Right.
So there's always something to it where somebody's going to be aggrieved or think there's somebody's not quite qualified and they got in there. It's just that's the environment we operate in too.
That being said, the thing about this is, and I've had this conversation privately with Speaker Shikarchi, and I think it is true, and I've certainly written it and said it publicly in many ways. It is an entirely reasonable argument from Michael Yolnowski at Roger Williams that this shouldn't happen. It looks bad, and the longer it waits, if you start to come into a potential of late May where the governor's making a decision and it's up against his budget, it's a month out from an endorsement from the Democratic Party. The closer you get to those things, I think the worse it looks, whether or not there's any provable deal cut in any sort of way.
Yeah.
Right? And any time a sitting Speaker of the House, the most powerful person, I've been thinking a lot about this. You've probably seen recently in the news, and I don't mean to criticize her, but Mayor Rivera in Central Falls wrote a letter to the editor in the Journal praising Joe Shikarchi about how qualified he is.
That's right. Yep.
That's lovely. But guess what? Maria Rivera needs Speaker Shikarchi to move the schools back to her control,
That's
right?
right.
It is inappropriate in some ways, not for endorsements like that to happen, but just be honest that the Speaker holds a lot of cards. Everyone who says, many people, not everyone, many people who are praising the Speaker about how wonderful a judge he should be, guess what? They're lobbyists who need something passed. There are politicians who need something for their community, all those kind of things. And we have to acknowledge that, and I think Speaker Shikarchi should be prepared for some level of criticism of that. He can't ignore those kind of things. That being said, none of it matters at the end of the day. If the governor if as long as the Speaker Shikarchi does in fact apply, and if the Judicial Nominating Commission puts him forward, I got to assume they would. My opinion, Mike Yelnowski's opinion, your opinion, nobody's opinion is going to matter. It's going to be the judge or the governor's going to have to make a call, and then Speaker Shikarchi would undoubtedly be approved in both the House and the Senate.
Exactly. And it is what it is. And for people who want to criticize that process, well, it's better for people who want to criticize that process. They're right to do so, but also, what's the alternative right now?
Should we elect the judges? I don't want that.
Exactly.
God forbid. My goodness.
Some Southern parish type vibe here. We're going to have an elected sheriff next. Dan McGowan, the Boston Globe. He's a columnist. He is the author of Roadmap. You get that every single weekday morning in your inbox. Send an email to
rinews@globe.com. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I had to turn it over because every time I announce the wrong email address when I do this. So thank God for the Boston Globe.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. Well, thank God for you. It's always fun to do this. We do it every election cycle, and so it's always good to see you and always good to be with you.
Do it soon. Thanks. Follow me on Instagram @Bill Bartholomew.